Do we want to say
as well, but
it's why is it?
okay. Kia ora everyone, welcome to the Term 3 AAC SIG. Thank you for joining us. Let's open with the karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa, pounamu te moana, hei hurahi ma tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I tātou katoa. Homie, hui, taiki e. Oh, so we just have a couple of notices before we get started. The ISAC 2024 conference is coming up. The speaker list, which we can send you the link for when we send out the minutes notes, does look amazing. So it's worthwhile just having a look, seeing who's there. The lineup looks really good this year. We were just having a chat about when you are doing applications going through, it is worth just doing cross comparison of quotes across different suppliers. Now that we have AT Link Assistive as well as DTSL, we're finding that sometimes the prices and the quotes that we are getting can be quite different. So it could be worth doing a comparison just before making an application.
That's about it.
That's about it. So I'll introduce you to our speakers. We have Fern here, wonderful Fern, who I have the privilege with working now at Oakland, but you probably know her from, she was at TalkLink for many, many years, and the lovely Claire, who's currently at TalkLink as well. So thank you for joining us.
Kia ora. Cool. The purpose of today is really to go over sort of SETT, an assessment. It sort of seemed to be a theme that kind of came up when we were asking people what they wanted covered and things. So Claire and I are just going to walk through, and then Claire, we're going to take them through some low and mid-tech solutions as well. Is that right? So as many of you will already know, the SETT framework is a tool that we often use when we're doing our AAC assessments, that was developed by Joy Zavala. And I often find in my practice that if I'm trying to implement something, or I'm doing a trial and things aren't quite going right, this is the best place to start in terms of doing that problem solving around, okay, what's going on? Why isn't this working? And going back to sort of the core elements of it. So we're just going to cover some of those today. And we're going to start off with the student or self. One thing that's really important to notice is that for those of us who maybe are working with people who are older, so they're not, we wouldn't consider them to be students anymore. Joy Zabala talked a lot in a webinar that she did in New Zealand, probably pre-COVID, about referring to people as self rather than person, because then the acronym becomes PET, and she felt like she really disliked the idea of that. So a student or self was long her preference. And this is an area that we kind of talk about, you know, what is somebody's interests, what are their abilities and skills, what expectations are there on them, what areas of concern are there, or what things do they find difficult, or what do they want to be able, what are they interested in, and what are they motivated by? And so Claire's very lovingly put this presentation together with some lovely examples around what it might look like when you fill out this part of the set, where you might be talking about, you know, this person needs to be able to communicate, they've got this diagnosis, they take this medication, they're able to follow these sets of instructions, discussion around their receptive expressive language, possibly some stuff around speech if someone's got some language, and the clarity of that, what people are worried about, any barriers that might be in place, and then things that they're interested in, so like playing with peers and adults, cars, cooking with whānau, bubbles. And it also takes into account the person's own preferences. Like quite often now, when we go into an assessment, whānau might have a really strong preference of something that they've seen or something that they're interested in. And it's really important to acknowledge and validate that, I think. The best tool is the one that gets used. So I think taking that into consideration and unpicking it. I know in the past I had someone who was like in a pediatrician's waiting room and someone was sitting next to them using Proloquo to go. And so the parent had gotten really interested in Proloquo to go because they'd actually seen it used functionally by somebody. And then someone else might be at a school where there's lots of touch chat or there's lots of LAMP, and so they've had more exposure to it. So definitely kind of thinking about that makes quite a big difference, I think, in terms of your assessment process. So then the next part really is around that environment and the environments that the person or the student is involved with. So there's the physical environment. So you kind of want to think about, like, physically, where do they go? So they're at school, are they out in the community? Are they spending time at home? Do they have time at respite? But also the people who are in the environment, what's their skills and knowledge of using AAC? What are their, how open are they to the use of alternative ways for communication? Are there anything about, is there anything about the environment that makes it really tricky for certain things to be used? For example, if we are regularly going swimming, for example, or whānau spend all summer at the beach, then something that's waterproof or that can deal with sand is going to be a really important aspect of that. Are there things that they've used before that have been successful or unsuccessful? And what did that look like? So it's really kind of thinking about where they are, but also who they're around. And I would say that often the environment is the like make or break with lots of AAC. Is like if you've got a really supportive environment, irrespective of somebody's cognitive or linguistic skills, you usually will see progress. I think when you're coming across barriers within a particular environment, that's where things can kind of slow down. So it's definitely worth really digging into the environment and spending some time understanding where people are at with those environmental factors. So then the first T then that we think about in SETT is that idea of tasks. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about tasks today because I've often found that this can be the bit that people find a bit tricky around identifying them or knowing what they might be. And so tasks are things that occur in that person's environment, or they're the motivating aspects that support someone to communicate. And it can be something as simple as maintaining a relationship with somebody or building that relationship with someone. It can be support to participate at a mat time at school. It could be around making choices. It can be around requesting, supporting literacy development. What can happen with some of our, particularly our older learners, I think, is where people know them so incredibly well. And so they actually don't have lots of tasks because lots of things they're either able to do independently. So they might be able to independently dress, independently choose what they wear, independently get the food that they want. Or it comes it's happened to them. Other people anticipate what's going to happen, and then they put those things in place without the need for communication to happen. And years ago, a colleague and I went to this little school in Auckland, this mainstream school, and we observed the magic flying pencil, which is an example of anticipation tasks. So this young boy is working with his new kaiwhina, and they come to the end of the block, and he's got his diary, and it's a written diary that he kind of ticks off when he's done a task. And he's sitting in front, his kaiwhina is sitting next to him, and he just sort of sticks his arm out wide, and a pencil flies into his arm, and then he ticks the thing off, and then he sticks his arm out again, and the pencil flies away, and then he puts his arm down, and his lunch appears in front of him, and then he just looks at the lunch, and then a bag is opened for him. So at no point through this whole 15-minute ritual does he have to do any interaction with the supporting adult, because the supporting adult is anticipating every single thing that he needs to be able to do. He doesn't look to her. And the interesting thing about that is that this was unique to this particular dynamic with this new kaiwhina, because a kaiwhina that he'd had for years would just like absolutely not tolerate that. So she would make him go and do things, and she would leave opportunities for him to make requests and for that communication to happen. And so that's a thing to sometimes look at when things are breaking down, is okay, what is happening in terms of the tasks? And then the flip side is also that those tasks need to be really interesting and motivating. I think sometimes the stuff that is really important to us or to whānau that we're working with, like toileting, pain, being able to say whether they've taken their medication, those sorts of things, they are important pieces of information, but they're not necessarily motivating to that young person that you're working with. And so it needs to come back to like, what is motivating and interesting? Because once you've kind of hooked them into using AAC, you can teach that other stuff sort of later. Okay. And then the final T that we're looking at is the tools. So as you all know, leaving tools to the last is important, so that you get a really holistic and rounded picture of what the person is capable of, what they're interested in, who's supporting them, how motivated they are, what the tasks are that they need to be able to do or want to be able to do. And then you take all of that information and you look at, okay, so what does that look like in terms of a tool? Like, what features and functions are we seeing in terms of a tool that will facilitate that? So if we've got somebody, for example, in our context, who is a non-speaking 7-year-old in a new entrant class, the vast majority of their peers are going to be unable to read and write. So they most likely will benefit from something with voice output so that they can have interactions with those people within that environment. If we've got somebody that maybe likes to double, triple tap a lot, you might need something that will allow you to put a dwell on, or use a system whereby double tapping is not encouraged. So like for LAMP, for example, you can't double tap because of the organization of the system. And there's all of those different bits and pieces that you kind of pull from the other bits of the set that set you up for success when you're looking at trials. So it's worth having a look. And like Claire's put here, that we I'm just looking at little questions popped up there, I think. Yes, dwell is where you can elongate how long you press the button for. So it can be like half a second, which can be enough to discourage the stimming behavior that you sometimes see with some of our kiddies. It doesn't always work, but it's something that sometimes can be useful.
Sorry, Fan, I'm just going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
And on iPad devices, it's under hold duration in the accessibility settings. Some apps will have it inbuilt in their settings, depending on the app, but if you're doing it just on the iPad, it's under hold duration.
And even if you've got someone who's maybe got a motor planning difficulty, which means they might accidentally double tap, that's a really useful feature to kind of have, where you maybe don't need like a Cat2 assessment full dedicated device. What you just need is to be able to tweak something that you've already got to make it functional. So yeah, and things like thinking about where things are going forward as well, in terms of, you know, we've got some of our 21-year-old learners, and thinking about the support that they're going to have when they leave school, and setting them up with a system that they can use and that will kind of support them outside of the school setting, which is very robust and supportive. And so sometimes thinking forwards about those aspects as well when you're considering your tools. Cool. So like I said, we're going to have a little bit of a chat about tasks and sort of their importance. All about goal setting, really, when we're doing our trials, we really want to kind of anchor that. And then again, when we're doing our training, is anchor it around those tasks, and that the tasks that are motivating. And just because there's a task there doesn't mean you necessarily need to use, you know, your flashy, whiz-bangy, high-tech AAC system. It is totally appropriate for a young person to walk into a classroom and high-five somebody or fist bump somebody for a greeting. You do not need to dig into your bag and get your AAC out for that necessarily. Then there might be other things whereby some of our learners go to hydrotherapy. It would not be appropriate to take your iPad into the hydro pool. But we've got what are they called? Floaties that we've put stuck some waterproof paper on top of with a core board so that they can be used in the water. So you really want to think about that concept as well around having a toolkit or a tool belt of solutions, and thinking that, you know, yes, having a high-tech system that's got robust comprehensive vocabulary is great, and wouldn't it be great if that could function everywhere, but the practicalities of life are that actually you need a few different things for different tasks. And so I always come back to really thinking about, okay, so what what is it this person wants, and what do they want to be able to do, not like what we think that they'd like to do. What do they want to be able to do? Because if they really want to be able to choose what dress they're wearing, and that's like super important for them, that has to be the thing that we start with, and then we can teach all the other stuff once they've kind of understood the concept of using AAC.
There's a question about visits to the pool. So about visits to the pool, there are a few public pools around New Zealand now that have their own core boards on the wall.
Yes, I've seen this on the Talking
Cool.
Facebook page. This is so awesome, and I think, you know, super inclusive to be able to have that available to everyone. So, and then when we're looking at goal setting, when we're thinking about like early stages, like when I'm doing trials or when I'm doing training for funded devices, particularly if you've got someone who's been using low tech quite effectively, all I'm doing in the early stages is taking this skill that I've got over here with my low tech and I'm applying it to the new thing. So we're not teaching language in a 2-week AAC trial. We're not teaching linguistic concepts or social interaction skills. We're literally taking what they can currently do on their low tech or gesture based system, because we know they understand those concepts, and we're showing them, here are those words in this format over here. So you're just trying to do that shifting of skills, which for lots of our autistic learners is incredibly difficult. You know, just to generalize skills from this thing to this thing, that in itself can be quite hard. So I think really starting there and then sort of thinking about, okay, where do we go next, and going back to your set and all that information that you've got around what's motivating, what's interesting, what's important, and thinking about that repetition with variety still. So you're wanting to pick, like if we know they've got the concept of more and finished, like can they do some activities where they're controlling things across the day in different contexts with different people, and thinking about that pausing with the communication temptations as well. And most of all, kind of making sure that it's fun. I think that we had somebody at a training long time ago sort of talk about, you know, children being able to say they wanted the heat pump turned on and off, which is super practical, but it's not particularly fun or interesting. So thinking about, you know, we had a really brilliant session. These guys had a really brilliant session this week of a young person who got to turn the hairdryer on and off using some switches, and they were over the moon, so excited to have something so simple and be able to control it. So really starting with stuff that's kind of so totally interesting. You know, if we've got teenagers, you know, talking about things that are current, listening to other people their age and thinking about like what they're interested in. You know, if we're looking at 7 and 8-year-olds, can we be talking about bums and poo jokes and things like that? Because that's what's really funny and interesting to them. Obviously, taking into context the whānau that you're working with and whoever else. But we read a book recently, I think Piranhas Don't Eat Bananas. And they just loved that we got to talk about bums for 15 minutes. It was just like the best thing ever. So definitely using that kind of fun, engaging stuff, because then it's, because this is really hard for our kids or the people that we work with. Like learning to use AAC is hard and it's slow. So the more interesting and the more fun and the more engaging it can be, the easier it's going to be for them to pick it up and use it. For sure. So before we move on to tools, has anyone got any questions about SETT? Joy's website is amazing and full of really cool resources, so definitely visit that. If there aren't, then I might hand over to you, Claire.
Kia ora everyone. Okay, I'm Claire. I'm from TalkLink. For the rest of the SIG today, we're just going to be talking about different tools, mostly low to mid tech, and you guys will have a really good grasp and understanding of them. But I know people at different levels and knowledge bases, and sometimes they're just good reminders as well. After this, we will talk a little bit about things that you can do while waiting for CAT 1 assessments or CAT 2 assessments, whether that's a CAT therapist from in the community or one from TalkThink. So cause and effect tools. Typically children or people learn cause and effect by playing and engaging with their environments around them. If a child has difficulty with access, so manipulating their hands or moving in things, then it can be really hard to learn that cause and effect because they don't get to experience the environment. Things that can support that are like power links or Praetorian eye clicks, which you can get from different suppliers at the moment. Essentially, they can convert any plug-in equipment to be activated by a switch. Like Fern mentioned earlier, it's really nice to, as someone gets older, to make it appropriate for their age. So whether that's a light while they're little for visual, that's something they really enjoy and have a CVI, but as they get older, potentially something like a mixer while baking or a song on the radio or stuff like that as well. Switch adapted toys are really popular for our littlies, as you can get battery interrupters, which you can use with commercial toys and things like that as well. And single, so switches step-by-steps are really helpful as well to make someone do something rather than it being a toy or a piece of technology. And just kind of explicit modeling cause and effect with like a go visual as well are really helpful. Single message or sequential message switches. So they can be used in all sorts of different ways, which are really nice, really helpful for our emergent communicators and to increase participation in environments as well, whether it's learning cause and effect, turn taking or choice making, how you use the switch, what visual you put on, what message you record will really change that. So people in schools can use it for my turn or their good mornings. With our littlies, we often use it for repetitive songs or books so that they can engage in it and be a part of it or interrupt someone while reading a book, not just being read to. Again, supporting that cause and effect with go or stop or knock it down. So that if you're building a tower and they physically are unable to build that tower themselves, they can have a say if it's time to knock it down. So really, again, good for those people who have difficulties manipulating things in their environment or participating in their environment. We've had a discussion with some of our occupational therapists about the types of switches, and there are lots of different types. What we've found is with our big Macs and things like that, it really promotes people whacking them. So if you can do a smaller one for access, we tend to kind of stick to those because it stops the roughness of equipment and that bop behavior, which I'm sure lots of people have seen as well. Just some reminders that labeling your switches or putting visuals on them is really helpful for us because we know what's on them, and also for our communicator because it differentiates the message. If we just have the switch and keep changing the message, there's nothing to give them a cue that, oh, it's a different message until someone's modeled it. So giving that meaning's really nice. Using a couple of switches at once for different activities or words or actions to get people to do, stop and go, is really nice for teaching that the different switches have the different meanings and can help that switch skill development. And always just keep modeling and things like that. Switches are really... Oh.
Sorry, we've had a question about the big points, and can we buy them singly yet, or are they still just in multi-packs?
I believe
I've
the
only
big
seen them
points
in
are
multi.
still in multi-packs, yeah.
Yeah, I've only seen them in multi-packs as well.
Yeah, so the step-by-steps are the single ones that we kind of get, and the points in the multi-packs. I think they're in packs of 6, are they? Yeah. So still in those multi-packs. But I think they're a lot cheaper than the other ones still, even though there's more. Yeah. So if you've got a communicator who is having difficulty with access, this is a really great place to start. Visual supports, I'm sure all of you guys use visuals. It's really evidence-based and it supports everyone with communication or learning difficulties. There's so many different ways we can use visuals, and the important piece for this is relating the tool to the task. So Fern talked about those tasks, and it's really important that we think about what is this visual actually doing, because each one, and we have often when you go to mainstream schools, I guess they'll try to switch around what a visual's doing and change the activity or task or purpose of it. So being really explicit about that task and what it's for and what it's helping with a team is really helpful, whether it's for behaviour supports or independence or a learning activity. It's really important that the team knows exactly what it's for and use it appropriately. The great thing about visuals is anyone can make them, whether it's us doing a drawing on the fly or having a beautiful laminated pinned up bit of work. It's something that everyone has access to. Our choice boards, so they support choice making and allowing someone to have autonomy in their activities. Some people, and for our emergent communicators, will have a choice board stuck on a fridge for food or stuck near the remote for choosing a TV show. Noting that we're using these only at a time where it's appropriate for them to have a choice, and there's that teaching in terms of now's not that time for free choice, it's this activity, so redirecting to a schedule if, for example, they got a choice board out or something like that. A reminder that having a something else, if it's appropriate, can be really helpful on a choice board as well, because we are limited and it's not everything that's in the environment necessarily. Of course, if that activity is not there, and that's that learning as well. We often pop in for choice boards that it's teaching requesting, and there's groups of people that if they don't see an option on their choice board, they're not going to use it at all, or they're not going to want to be on it. It's not that they don't know how to use it, it's that they only want to do their activity. So there's groups of people who will just, if what they want is not there, won't use it. So really it's a choice making, because not all their requests will necessarily be there as well. So that's another reason why that's something else can be helpful too. Visual schedules, timetables and sequences. You'll all be really familiar with these. So as we know, they increase independence, can decrease anxiety, support verbal language and flexibility, and help with challenging behaviours. We see them lots and lots in schools and not necessarily being used 100% how we should. So I guess reminders to reflect on and things to tell teams. We need to teach the use of it to the actual communicator as well as the team. If you think about when we were at school or at uni and we have our timetables, that all goes back to when we were quite little and we explicitly got taught the steps and what each but means. So if that means looking at that and directing to that activity, explicit teaching is really helpful. Reminding the team to set up the schedule together so that the communicator knows what's happening that day. And the really big one is going back to it after each activity to tick it off or move it to the finished box, because without doing that, it doesn't mean anything, because we're not showing the passing of time. That concept is out the window because it's just something that's there and it's always there. If we don't refer back to the visual timetable or schedule, it's really not serving its purpose at all. It's just a jumble of things we're doing. If there is a change, that's totally fine. It's normal. Just going back and again, reflecting on it. Just thinking about how our mainstream students learnt and how they currently use a timetable. If they're not enjoying maths or whatever, they'll look up and see what's next or what time lunch is and things like that. So it's all about reflecting on that, because it is a typical tool that is used. It's just making it accessible.
Claire, I've got a teacher I'm working with at the moment, and she's got her schedule set up on sort of one side, and then she's got a line down the middle. And then if something changes, she writes it in next to what they should be doing. Or if it's sort of like maybe most of the class are doing this activity, but someone else is going off to do something with a therapist or on a trip or something. And that's a really nice way of having that like change to the timetable kind of built in, which is quite cool.
No, that's so cool. Awesome. Thank you, Finn. Activity specific pages and boards. So they're just our communication boards that have really specific language related to a really specific activity. Fern mentioned at swimming, you'll often find that it's activity boards that are stuck onto the boogie boards because it's all the words for swimming that you'll need in that time, or the feelings around swimming. Really that balance between if you've got an emergent communicator in their visual field and how they're accessing, if they can access lots of cells or few cells. So activity specific pages and boards are really functional and helpful for that specific task. So again, it's always for all these tools going back to that task and that set to kind of see which would suit as well. Of course, you can bundle activity specific pages, but it's all about how functional, and if it gets to a point when you've got too many that it's too much. I have an eye gaze user who isn't in supported seating all the time, so they're now printing out their activity pages from the high tech to put in the boxes so that they can have typical interactions with peers their age, and they can use partner assisted scanning on that as well. So it's a great option if supported seating is not always appropriate and you're still wanting to model that communication, or for them to have access to their alternative communication. Core boards, we know lots about core boards and communication boards. The main thing that I'll kind of mention in here is that it's really important to have fringe on our core boards if it's for someone, because it just becomes not meaningless, but it's not motivating. The fringe of a core board is what is motivating and interesting to our communicators, and without that it can be really hard to have someone have ownership and enjoy using it, because they're always relying on someone knowing, if I've only got go, that person needs to know where I want to go. So I've got my fringe, I can tell you exactly where, and I'm not relying on anyone. It's a really great starting place, and we do it so much. It's just a reminder to have that fringe and personalizing it. It doesn't need to be the whole fringe. It can just be whatever's motivating, whether it's places or people or food. It doesn't need to be that whole massive thing. Just introduce them bit by bit and kind of go from there. It is a really great in between, but we know it is limited as well. Developing a yes and no. This is something that comes up for lots of different systems, particularly for things like POD and with the use of partner scanning. Yes and no is a really important part of communication because you can use yes and no for a variety of means or ways. I'm just going to plug my computer in. Just done a little dim. It's a really common thing, and it means that anyone is able to communicate and interact with someone as they get older if they've got a yes and no. There's a whole range of different ways someone can say yes and no. There's no right or wrong. It's just whatever suits that communicator. We do not recommend using eye contact or smiles because it can have an alternative meaning that they're happy or nervous or just wanting to have a look at something. We also don't use it because sometimes we're asking questions where yes is not a particularly happy answer as well. An example might be, did you have grandma's funeral yesterday or something? And yes is not particularly appropriate for someone to smile for that. When looking and developing yes and no, we often have communicators who will start one way, and as they grow older, it'll be shaped or developed to a more conventional way. we want, and as SRTs, we can at times get really caught up in that AAC world of, yes, it's going to be able to do all these things, which it does, but it's just a reminder for some things we want to be able to shape and make it conventional, because then we're not relying on a tool being there. We're not relying on that communication partner being trained on a system, particularly when high-tech systems break down or things aren't appropriate for like hydrotherapy and things like that. So lots of teams will have different ways of saying yes and no, particularly as communicators fatigue too. So people use yes/no lanyards, which is awesome, using eye pointing or their hand touching. Switches. In this picture here, you can see a picture that the switches are being used for shaping. And I'll talk about that really quickly in a little bit. If we're using a switch on a tray for a yes and no, that's totally fine. The tricky thing is that it needs to always be there or be in a consistent position. And if you've got someone who's also using a high-tech switching system or other switches, it can get a little bit overwhelming, but a really good place to start. Eye pointing, whether that's on a yes/no lanyard or another tool. Some people use blink yes and no's as well. Hand gestures, you'll see in older clients, they'll do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And head gestures, that's whether a shake or a nod or an approximation. And as some people will also shape vocalizations to make vocal approximations of a yes and no, because yes and no are pretty, yeah, nah, can be shaped. So shaping is really key. You can see lots of shaping supports and information, and we speak pod and things like that. In this picture with the switching, the reason the switches are there is it's because it's teaching the movement of my head going down and up for yes, so touching that yes switch under here, and then the no switch, moving my head to the side. So those switches aren't actually going to be there in life. That's purely for the teaching of down, up, yes, away, center, no. And that's just so that communicator gets feedback for that.
Claire, we've had a question from Jane about what would you recommend for a child who is visually impaired and also has no fine motor control?
So it's really hard to know without seeing bits and pieces. If those head movements are fine, shaping would be good. Really important when you're doing shaping with someone who has a vision impairment is that you're verbally saying the movement, that I'm moving my head down, I move my head up, so that they can hear it and it's being explained to them. Sometimes you might use some tactile cues with that, but depends on how they go. Depends on their movement, if they can access a yes switch or if they can be shaped and things like that as well. Really hard to say without seeing, but there's lots of different ways. Yep, Finn.
Jump in there, Claire. The other thing is to remember that you don't need to have the full gross movement of like all the way down to your chest and all the way back up, or all the way to the side and all the way back down to the other side for yes and no. It can be quite a subtle movement. Like I've had people who've just gone from up, taking their head back and then taking it back to sort of center is enough, or like a little to the side. I've got somebody who does eyebrows up for yes. So I think, look, you need to take a holistic view, and I would work with somebody like an occupational therapist to look at what is the person doing, and of those things, what can we shape to be a yes and no. And then, like Claire said, really kind of verbally saying, I move my head up, back to the center for yes, to the side, and to the center for no. And I think the We Speak Pod YouTube has got some of those exact examples. Hey, yeah,
I am working with a therapist from Blends, so I'm working with other people. But this child, she has a thing called Fox's syndrome. It's really rare, and she's kind of like about 3 months, but she's 3 years old. Yeah, anyway, I just wondered if anyone had any wonderful ideas, because it's really just trying to establish cause and effect and a way for her to show that she understands. It's quite difficult, you know. I'm finding it difficult working with her anyway. because we do tend to be visual centric. We think that visuals will solve things quite often, but not in this particular case.
Yep. And the example that you can see on screen is not relying on any visual support as well with the switch positioning if the head movements are fine, because it's getting that tactile prompt from the switch and the sound as well. Yeah, definitely working with an OT or a PT if you've got them involved in the teams for bits and pieces like this, because shaping yes and no's is us, but more in that realm. So we need to definitely work together. Needed for that too.
There's a visiting, what are they, VNT, visiting neurodevelopmental therapists involved. So I am working with them, but she gets sick a lot too, and that's the other thing. So you make appointments and then she's too sick. But anyway, I'll let you get on with your presentation. Thank you for your suggestions. Yeah.
And power links and things like that for cause and effect lights and things we often use for CBI.
And those switches, I thought they might be handy actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Goodbye. Communication passports are something that I know we do a lot for transitioning teams, but potentially we do them in book forms and they tend to get lost a lot through the journey. Really helpful if you've got a book one to do a one pager if you can, just so whoever is interacting with that person knows exactly what they like, what they don't like, things like that. People sometimes put them on the very first page of the file to get that. And so you don't have to read through all their notes. I know something that we do a lot already. Another helpful thing would be doing it on a communication device if someone has already got a communication device, which this image shows here. It allows anyone really quickly to form that connection with a person and be able to know about them and how best to engage. Oh, sorry about that. Just my dog barking.
Claire, we've had another question about the visual impairment side of things. So it's, could you use the 3D tactile symbols on the verbal output switches with visual impaired?
Sorry, was that for me, that question?
No, I think it was for Claire. Kirsty could
Okay.
probably clarify, but yeah, I mean, it's another suggestion, I guess, but yeah.
I don't think cognitively she'd be up to that yet, but maybe one day.
Yeah, tactile cues and prompts on any kind of tool can be helpful as well. Absolutely. A gesture dictionary. So this is a really helpful ongoing document. It's really important that it's ongoing and teams can jot things down as it goes. Really helpful with our emergent communicators who might not have really clear or conventional ways of communication. Also really helpful for our complex communicators. How you do it is you just get someone who knows them really, really well, observe them, and then you pop down the behavior, what it means, and what someone should do as a result of that. So really great for teacher aides or new support teams who don't know the communicator but will need to pick up these bits and pieces. E-train frames, if you've got someone who you're waiting for an assessment for high tech of eye gaze, you can use activity board E-train frames to start with for eye pointing. For this image, there's 6, but you don't need 6. You could just do 2 or 4, depending on what they can access and what their learning and their level is at. So it's eye gaze for people who can't use a communication device with their hands, and the options are presented visually just like we do typically, and it's how someone looks at it to select. Using eye gaze activity boards is limiting because you can only have a few pictures per board. However, it's a really good starting point if you're needing someone to develop eye gaze or eye pointing, and will then in future allow them to pretty quickly go on to a high-tech device or a more robust eye gaze communication book without having to build those base skills. So if you've got someone who's having and is able to having difficulties with their hands, we recommend definitely looking at some eye pointing to support that, because eye gaze is a means of direct access through your eyes, whereas switching can take a bit longer and have steps as well.
A little question about the eye gaze, Claire. If you are doing eye gaze for yes/no symbols, would you start with ETRAN frame or support eye gaze skill, or just focus lots on modelling with yes/no symbols first?
So it totally depends back to those tasks. So if you're working on teaching yes and no, yep, you can do that in a lanyard. You can also add it to it if you're wanting to do some choice making between activities rather than yes, no questions. So rather than, do you want to do Play-Doh? Yes, no. Do you want to do drawings? Yes, no. You can have Play-Doh and water play and do that as well. So both work on that skill of eye gaze practice and eye pointing. It really comes down to what your task is and your language goal there as well.
And
so
just sorry.
No, okay, fine.
If you're going to do both, you just want to make sure you're consistent as well. So if your yes is on the left with your lanyard, then it also needs to be on the left of your eye gaze, your ETRAN frame. So just making sure you've got that marrying up. Yeah, so that they get that motor planning of I look left for yes and right for no, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another reason for we'd like to do e-train activity boards like this one here that's actually laminated in, because then we know where the position is, so that if we change an activity, we're not every day moving bubbles from top left, then it goes around. It's not too testing. We can build that motor plan. Not always possible, but we like to try keep it as consistent as we can. Quick talkers, they are the replacement of the Go Talk, so it's a communication device with, there's a bunch of different types of cell sizes you can get, and same as the step-by-steps and things, you just record a message on each button. It's a mid-tech option with speech output. The really nice thing about a quick talker is that it's got an inbuilt key guard. So for those communicators who might need a key guard, it will help them develop their point rather than an iPad or things like that, which are harder. If you've got someone who needs less cells, it supports that as well. There are 5 different levels, so you can kind of have 5 different activities or vocab pages per each one that you can use and switch between. But a really nice option for an emergent communicator or someone who needs to get their message out quickly about a specific thing, around cares or whatever that may be. Lots of information. That's okay. So other tips for waiting for a Cat 1 or Cat 2 assessment: completing a set yourselves to see what low-tech or no-tech tools might be helpful for them, looking at how they access and how you could develop their access, whether that's with the support of an OT, looking at things like poppets and different activities if someone wants to direct access, or looking at how they might have a switch and things like that. If you've got someone who's going to be using switches, you think, but maybe that cause and effect and power link stuff can be really helpful. Modeling communication tools, of course, we do lots of that. So, and educating the team. When someone comes in to do a Cat 1 or 2 assessment, it's really, really a lot easier when they've got that base of the strategies and what modeling is and things like that. So it's really helpful whether it's a community therapist or someone else in your office if you're MOE, or at your school if you're at a special school. Creating a language-rich environment, so lots of modeling on a system, whether that's a core board or a pod book, whatever you have, activity-specific pages. If you're unsure, we also have the NZSTA has the ACC, I forget the word for it. Very nice.
Specialist advisor, something like that.
Specialist advisor, yeah.
Isn't it Anne at the moment?
It is currently Anne, but it may be changing. So we've got the NZSTA has specialist advisors for each bits and pieces, and there is an AAC one who at the moment is Anne from TalkLink. So you can always flick an email through there as well, or you can get in contact with TalkLink if you've got someone who you're working with, or often if you put a referral through, there'll be a screening and we'll suggest some things to be doing and working on in the meantime.
I think one of the biggest things when I was in that role doing those referral screening, which is not that long ago, you know, one of the things that kind of I think people find tricky is when you've got someone who maybe has got quite a bit of oral language. And so a 77 location call board feels like a bit redundant because they're not going to use it for communication, because they can actually use maybe 2-word utterances, but they might have quite unclear speech, or they're 12 and they've only got 2-word utterances, so their language is kind of limited. There's still heaps of value in the team around that person using something like a call board, because they start to learn those skills around modeling, providing communication opportunities, providing a communication rich environment, and that makes the transition to a high-tech assessment so much smoother and easier and faster, because once the supporting adult understand about modeling, and I've had so many over the years that kind of really didn't want to start on a low-tech system initially, and then afterwards have said, I'm so glad we did that, because moving into the high-tech was so much easier. And in my role, when I was doing that referral screening part at TalkLink, you know, I used to talk to people and sort of really acknowledge, I totally understand that probably the kid that you're working with is not going to use a call board for their expressive communication because they're getting their needs met, but still start to introduce that idea that symbols have a function, that they hold meaning, and provide those opportunities for communication, because likely then you can move really quickly onto a high-tech trial for those kinds of kids. I think those are the ones that probably cause the most, they're the trickiest when it comes to implementing something in that in-between, that in that waiting stage.
Absolutely, yeah. And also other communication assessments, the social networks, AAC profile, communication matrix would also be really valuable for those types of communicators to kind of, and language samples, to kind of see what they're communicating to who and how efficient it is, and kind of looking for those gaps and where that gap is, that's that task, and then that will help guide that tool as well.
Also pathways for Call First, Claire, which I think is still free. So it's an app and you can input it's designed to support you to use Tobii Dynavox products, but you don't have to just have it for Tobii Dynavox products. And you can put it in so I'm just using Lily because she's sitting next to me. So it's Lily, and then I can go through the assessment and determine like what kind of stage Lily's communication at. Is she an emergent communicator? Is she a conventional communicator? And then it'll give me like lots of ideas of what I can do next. And that's just, you can download it. There's a Windows version, and I think there's an Apple app version as well, but it's free.
What was that? Sorry, Fen?
It's called Pathways for Call First. And it's just, I really should use it more, because it's a really great tool, and it means you've got a digital, and it even has like lesson plans and things like that in it, so you can kind of give people ideas of what to do next, but it really captures that assessment in a digital form, so you can have like 20 different people on there and know where they're at.
Absolutely, and potentially if that's something you guys would like to cover at another SIG, we can look at the different AAC assessments as well as the SETT. Yeah, so I guess really brief cover on everything. There's lots of different resources out there that I'm sure you all have, whether that's from your internal agencies and organisations, or from TalkLink, or just from Asher or whatever. So definitely lots of places to explore there if anything has caught your eye. Oh, I forgot my questions. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up?
No, I've just shared a link with the Pathways for Call First, and Fen, it is on Apple and Microsoft. You are right.
Sophie. Awesome. I'll hand back over to Lily for our closing karakia.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Fern and Claire. Lots of food for thought. So we'll just wrap up with our closing karakia. Ki whakaharia te tapu, he waitea Aotearoa. Ki taruki whakataha ai, ki taruki whakataha ai. Homie, hui, tai kia. Awesome.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks, everyone. This is recorded and we will share it and try to get it out for you guys in the holidays. Awesome. Thank you.
Ka kite.
Lauren, would you like to stop recording for us, please?